Ladies and gentlemen, imagine walking into a room full of strangers. The first thing someone asks you is, "So, what do you do?" And you tell them. Maybe you say, "I'm a doctor, I'm an artist," or "I work in finance." And just like that, you've been put into a box, a neatly labeled file in someone's mental cabinet. But what if you didn't answer that question? What if you refused to be defined by a title? What if instead you let them wonder? We live in a world where people are obsessed with defining themselves by their work, as if that's all they are. But here's the secret. The moment you tell someone what you do, you lose something. You lose the chance to be seen as something more, something unknown, something intriguing. And this is not just about impressing others, it's about freeing yourself. Because once you stop identifying with a job title, you open the door to something much greater. So today, I'm going to show you why the most interesting, most powerful, and most liberated people don't tell others what they do, they simply be. We think a title gives us credibility, but in reality, it's just a mask. A writer isn't someone who writes books. They are someone who explores life through words. A teacher isn't just someone who teaches. They are someone who awakens curiosity in others. The moment you attach yourself to a title, you start living within its limits. The most vibrant people don't walk around handing out labels. They let others discover them naturally over time through experience, not just a sentence in an introduction. Have you ever met someone who didn't tell you exactly what they did? Maybe they smiled and said, "I do a little bit of everything," or "I work on things that excite me." Weren't you immediately more interested in them? Mystery has power. It invites curiosity. It draws people toward you instead of pushing them away with a label. And this isn't about deception. It's about depth. Let people feel who you are rather than just hear what you do. Many people hold on to their titles because it feeds their ego. They want to be respected, admired, or even feared. But if your sense of self depends on a title, what happens when that title is taken away? The man who calls himself a CEO may feel powerful today, but what happens if he loses his company tomorrow? Who is he then? The moment you attach your identity to a role, you set yourself up for suffering. Real confidence doesn't come from a title. It comes from knowing that no matter what you do, you are already complete. The most respected people don't walk around announcing who they are. They let their presence do the talking. Think of a great musician. Does he stop a conversation to tell you he's a musician? No, he plays and you feel it. Don't tell people what you do. Show them who you are through the way you move, the way you listen, the way you live. So the next time someone asks, "What do you do?" pause for a moment, feel the urge to answer, and then let it go. Smile, say, "I live, I explore, I create," or just say, "It's hard to put into words." Watch what happens. Because life isn't about defining yourself, it's about being yourself. The power of intrigue is one of the most overlooked forces in human interaction. In a world where everyone rushes to introduce themselves with a job title, a career label, or a predefined role, those who hold back create an irresistible mystery. The moment you tell someone exactly what you do, they feel like they've figured you out. They categorize you, file you away in their mind, and move on. But when you withhold that information, even just for a little while, something fascinating happens. People lean in. They want to know more. They start guessing, imagining, creating stories in their heads about who you might be. And in that curiosity, in that space of not knowing, you become memorable. Think about the last time you met someone truly captivating. Were they the type to immediately explain their entire resume, or were they the type who let their presence do the talking? The most magnetic people are the ones who don't rush to explain themselves. They engage in conversation without trying to prove anything. They listen more than they speak. They make you feel like there's something more beneath the surface, something you can't quite grasp. And that is what keeps you interested. When someone asks, "So, what do you do?" the instinctive reaction is to respond with a job title, as if that single phrase sums up an entire human existence. But a title is just a shortcut, a way to make sense of things quickly. And when you give in to that shortcut, you reduce yourself to something small, something predictable. Instead, what if you simply smiled and said, "It's complicated," or "I do a little bit of everything," and left it at that? You might be surprised by the response. Instead of nodding politely and moving on to the next topic, people will ask follow-up questions. They'll be curious. They want to know what exactly you mean by that. And suddenly, instead of being just another accountant, just another engineer, just another entrepreneur, you become a puzzle, one they want to solve. There's a reason mystery novels sell millions of copies. There's a reason we are drawn to people who don't reveal everything at once. The unknown is fascinating. It makes us pay attention. makes us feel like we have to earn the answer rather than having it handed to us too easily. And this applies not just in social settings, but in every aspect of life. The artist who doesn't explain his work forces people to feel it. The leader who doesn't boast about his achievements, but simply moves with quiet confidence, commands more respect. The thinker who allows silence to exist in a conversation instead of filling it with words exerts a presence far more powerful than someone who talks endlessly. Holding back isn't about being deceptive. It's about allowing space for depth to emerge. It's about giving people the gift of discovery, of drawing their own conclusions instead of feeding them a neatly packaged narrative. When you cultivate an air of intrigue, people don't just hear about you, they experience you, and experiences are unforgettable. We live in a world obsessed with labels. The moment you meet someone new, one of the first things they ask is, "What do you do?" It's not because they care deeply about your career, it's because they are searching for a category to place you in. The answer you give will determine whether they see you as important, ordinary, impressive, or forgettable. It's an automatic sorting process, one that happens in seconds. But here's the trap. The moment you define yourself by what you do, you become limited by that definition. Instead of being seen as a multidimensional human being, you become a single line on a business card, a job title, a role in someone else's perception. And if you accept that definition, you start to believe that's all you are. Imagine if you never told anyone what you did for a living. How would people perceive you? They wouldn't know whether to treat you with admiration, indifference, or skepticism. They wouldn't be able to categorize you instantly. And in that uncertainty, something powerful happens. They are forced to engage with you as a person, not as a profession. They start paying attention to the way you speak, the energy you carry, the presence you bring into a room. You become a mystery, and mystery is magnetic. When people don't know exactly who you are, they have to experience you rather than judge you. This changes everything. Instead of being dismissed or placed on a pedestal because of a job title, you create a space where people connect with you on a deeper level. Conversations shift from small talk to something more meaningful. Instead of the usual scripted exchange, "I'm a lawyer. Oh, that must be stressful." You open the door to something far more interesting. You give people the chance to ask real questions. What kind of things excite you? What are you passionate about? What are you working on right now? These are the questions that reveal who you actually are beyond a job title. And this is not just about how others see you. It's about how you see yourself. When you stop defining yourself by your work, you start to recognize the vastness of who you truly are. You are not just a profession, not just a role in the economy, not just a cog in the machine of society. You are a creator, an explorer, a thinker, a being in motion. The less you identify with a single definition, the freer you become. Free to evolve, to change, to step into new possibilities without hesitation. Because when you are not trapped by a label, you are not afraid to lose it. The irony is, the more you resist defining yourself, the more intriguing you become. People are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin without needing external validation. They are drawn to those who embody something larger than a career. And that's the secret. When you stop telling people what you do, you start showing them who you truly are. We often take pride in the titles we hold, the roles we play, and the careers we build. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that what we do defines us. Society reinforces this idea relentlessly. Introducing yourself without a job title feels almost incomplete, as if your worth is tied to your profession. But here's the truth. Your job is not your identity. The moment you attach yourself too strongly to a title, you fall into a dangerous trap. You start believing that your value depends on what you produce, what you achieve, and how others perceive your success. And once you internalize this, you become imprisoned by it. Think about it. When someone asks, "What do you do?" and you proudly say, "I'm a doctor," or "I'm a writer," there's an unconscious shift in how you perceive yourself. It feels good, doesn't it? It feels like validation, as if you've proven something. But the problem with this is subtle yet profound. If your identity is built around what you do, what happens when you lose it? What happens when the job ends, when the title no longer fits, when the world no longer sees you the way you once saw yourself? The businessman who identifies only as a CEO is lost when his company fails. The athlete who believes his worth is in his sport feels empty when his career is over. The artist who ties her identity to her craft struggles when inspiration fades. The ego loves to cling to titles because they provide certainty. They give you a sense of place in the world, a script to follow, but in doing so, they also create fear. Fear of change, fear of failure, fear of stepping outside the lines of who you think you're supposed to be. And this fear keeps you trapped. It prevents you from evolving, from exploring new possibilities, from embracing the fluidity of life itself. The most powerful people are those who are not bound by a single identity. They move freely between roles, unafraid of reinvention, unafraid of letting go. They don't need to declare who they are because they simply are. Their presence speaks louder than any job title ever could. They understand that identity is not something fixed. It is something lived, something experienced moment to moment. When you detach from the ego's need to define itself, you become truly free, free to explore without fear of losing yourself, free to create without worrying whether it fits your image, free to fail without seeing it as a reflection of your worth. You are not your job, you are not a title on a business card. You are something infinitely more vast, more fluid, more alive. And the moment you realize this, you step out of the prison of labels and into the vast, limitless space of who you truly are. Most people don't realize they are trapped, not by physical barriers, not by laws, but by something far more subtle, the identity they have constructed around what they do. A job title, a role in society, a profession that seems to give them meaning. They wear it like armor, believing it makes them strong, believing it defines them. But what they don't see is that this armor is also a cage. The moment you tell people what you do, you are handing them the key to that cage and allowing them to lock you inside. And once you are inside, the walls start to close in. It starts innocently enough. You introduce yourself as a lawyer, a teacher, an entrepreneur, and people nod in approval. They understand you now. Or at least they think they do. Their minds automatically place you in a category, assigning you characteristics, limitations, and expectations based on that single piece of information. And maybe, at first, this feels good. It feels like validation, like being understood. But over time, you begin to realize the weight of it. You begin to notice that people treat you in a way that fits their idea of what you do, rather than who you actually are. And worse, you begin to see yourself that way, too. The mind loves certainty. It loves labels. It wants to be something definite, something solid, something recognizable. But life itself is fluid, ever-changing. The more you attach yourself to a title, the more you resist this natural flow. You start making decisions not based on what excites you, not based on what brings you alive, but based on what fits the role you believe you must play. The artist stops experimenting because he is afraid to step outside his style. The businessman ignores his creative instincts because they don't fit the image of success he has built. The teacher hesitates to become a student again because she has spent so long being the one who knows. When you define yourself by what you do, you become terrified of losing it. You hold on tightly, afraid of change, afraid of failure, afraid of anything that threatens the identity you have built. And in that fear, you shrink. You avoid risks. You say no to things that might challenge you, that might force you to see yourself differently. You become trapped in a version of yourself that no longer feels alive. But the truth is, you were never meant to be just one thing. You were never meant to live inside a single definition. You are not a job. You are not a title. You are a constantly unfolding experience, a being in motion. And the moment you stop clinging to an identity, the moment you stop telling people what you do, you step into something far greater. You step into the vastness of possibility. You step into the freedom of simply being. Words are easy. Anyone can say what they do, what they believe in, what they stand for. But words don't mean much unless they are backed by action. The world is filled with people who talk endlessly about their ambitions, their dreams, their accomplishments, but very few let their presence do the talking. When you tell people what you do, you give them a neat and tidy way to define you. But when you let your actions speak, you leave them with something much more powerful, an experience. Think of the most remarkable people in history, the ones who left a deep impact. They were not the ones who constantly announced themselves, who bragged about their status, or who felt the need to be understood through words. They simply did. They moved through the world with purpose, letting their work, their energy, and their presence tell the story for them. Their greatness was not in what they claimed to be, but in what they silently embodied. A true artist doesn't need to declare, "I am an artist." They create, and their work speaks for itself. A great leader doesn't need to remind people that they are in charge. They act with integrity, and people naturally follow. A master at anything doesn't need to convince others of their skill. They simply demonstrate it through effortless action. The moment you stop trying to explain yourself, the moment you stop seeking validation through words, you gain something far more valuable. authenticity. When you tell someone what you do, you risk reducing yourself to a title, a profession, a role that may or may not fully capture who you are. Worse, you invite judgment before the other person has even had the chance to truly experience you. Maybe they admire your title, maybe they dismiss it, but either way, they have already placed you in a mental box. And once inside that box, it becomes difficult to escape. But when you don't immediately define yourself, when you simply exist and let your actions create the impression, you force people to pay attention in a different way. Instead of relying on preconceived notions, they are drawn in by your energy, your presence, the way you move through the world. They form opinions not based on what you say about yourself, but based on how they feel in your presence. And that feeling is what stays with them long after words have been forgotten. This is why the most powerful people are often the quietest about their success. They understand that true influence is not about speaking loudly. It's about embodying something real. It's about allowing others to witness who you are rather than telling them who you are. Words fade, titles change, jobs come and go, but the impact of a person who lets their actions speak, that lingers, that stays, that is remembered. We live in a world obsessed with proving, showcasing, and defining. People introduce themselves with job titles, accomplishments, and carefully crafted identities, believing that who they are is something to be explained rather than something to be experienced. But what if none of that was necessary? What if you didn't have to tell people what you do, what you stand for, or who you are? What if, instead of proving yourself, you simply were? The deepest wisdom, the most profound experiences, and the most extraordinary people don't announce themselves. They don't feel the need to be labeled or understood in a single sentence. They don't seek validation through external recognition. Instead, they live in a state of presence, allowing their being to communicate what words never could. A river does not need to explain that it flows, it simply moves. A fire does not need to tell you that it burns, you feel its warmth. A musician does not need to convince you that they are talented, you hear it in the music. The most powerful things in life are those that do not need to declare themselves. They exist in their fullness, unbothered by whether others can define them. When you stop identifying with a title, you step into something far greater. The art of simply being. You are not confined to a single narrative. You are not obligated to fit into a predefined role. You are free to explore, to evolve, to exist without explanation. And in that freedom, you discover something profound. Life is not about proving who you are, but about experiencing who you are. The moment you stop trying to define yourself, you step into a space of infinite possibility. You become adaptable, fluid, open to transformation. You no longer feel the need to protect an identity because you realize you are never just one thing to begin with. You are not a title, you are not a job, you are not a reputation to be maintained. You are something much deeper, something that cannot be captured in words, something that can only be felt. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to prove yourself, people see you more clearly. When you stop announcing what you do, others become more curious. When you stop attaching yourself to a label, you become limitless. The most magnetic people are not those who tell you who they are, but those whose presence alone reveals something profound. So the real challenge is not to find the perfect way to introduce yourself. The real challenge is to let go of the need to introduce yourself at all, to trust that who you are is not something that needs to be explained, but something that can simply be lived. Because the most powerful statement you can make is not in what you say, it's in how you. So in the end, the real power lies not in what you tell people, but in what they feel when they are around you. Your identity is not a title, not a profession, not a carefully crafted explanation. It is the energy you bring, the presence you embody, the way you move through the world. When you stop defining yourself by what you do, you open yourself up to something far greater. The freedom to simply be. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to fit into a box. You don't have to hand people a neatly packaged version of who you are. Instead, you can let them experience you in real time, without labels, without limitations, and in doing so, you become something unforgettable, not because of what you say, but because of what you are.